Alright, good evening everybody. Welcome to today's class. So we took like a detour. We're considering the arguments for God's existence. So I know that we did the moral argument, right? What other argument do we do? We did Kalam cosmological argument. Then we did Leibniz cosmological argument. Have we? Did we do any other one? So we did Kalam, we did that. Alright. We've not done fine tuning. No, we've not. Okay. Can you hear me? It's not this timber. Okay. So we start my phone. So we did Kalam, we did Leibniz, then we now had some breaks, then we had our assignments that many people did not give. Did you present your findings? Did you do the assignment? You didn't do the assignment. You don't know anywhere that is not a Christian. That's the only person you know that is not a Christian. Okay. So yeah.
Since Apologetics has just been writing a test,
Alright, that's fine. Longty told me she's out of town soon. So it's okay. So let me just ensure that we're live because alright, so yeah, I think we're live now. Alright, so we're going to continue. We'll do Anselm's arguments today, and then we'll try to look at the fine-tuning argument. Or maybe we'll just make it a big heading. We'll talk about design, and then we'll talk about the design of the universe, and then the design of life, and all of that. So when we're done with that, we'll probably talk about Jesus' life, give an apologetics for Jesus, for the resurrection, and then when we're done with that, I'll try to see if we can answer some questions that are usually asked, and then we'll finish up with Mere Christianity. Yeah, you have to finish that book. So when that happens, we would have finished batch 1.
Stop by your study.
Alright, so today we're looking at Anselm's ontological argument. So this argument was proposed by Anselm. Anselm was a Catholic monk, right? He was Italian, but at the time of this thing, he was England. He was in England. He was a Catholic monk, and then he actually did a lot of work, philosophically and all of that. He's responsible for this argument, which is the ontological argument. He's also responsible in large parts for the satisfaction theory of the atonement. Yeah, he was one of the people that pushed the satisfaction theory. But, so, the ontological argument. Basically, ontology speaks of being. It's actually the study of being and existence. It's kind of like the study of being. So we have human beings, we have divine beings, we have animal beings, you have dog beings, you have every kind of being that there is. So ontology is the study of being, right? And existence. Now, Anselm's argument would require for us to understand a couple of terms. This argument is very simple. This argument is probably even easier than any of the arguments you've heard. It's just more philosophical, but it's simple, right? So, number one, the first thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about this is we have to define God. God is the greatest conceivable being, which I'm sure by now you are tired of hearing, right? God is the greatest conceivable being. In the words of Anselm, he calls God a maximally great being. So you have greatest conceivable being, then you have maximally great being. Maximally great, it means that his greatness reaches to the maximum. His greatness goes beyond everything and gets to the maximum. Okay, maybe later then. Remind me about a maximally great pizza, because that's the example that people usually use. Because there are some things that I probably forget. But then, he uses a maximally great being. He calls God a maximally great being. Now, a maximally great being has to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world. That's what it means to be a maximally great being. I'm going to explain possible worlds. So, a maximally great being has to be all-powerful, all-knowing, right, and morally perfect in every possible world. It means that a maximally great being will have all of the positive attributes to a maximal degree. So, God is holy to the maximal degree. God is love to the maximal degree. God is righteous to the maximal degree, right? Every attribute of God is in its superlative because he is actually the superlative. So every attribute of God finds maximumness in God. You get? So you can be holy, right? But you cannot be the holiest of all. So you can be righteous, but you cannot be the most righteous, right? You can be loving, but you cannot be loving in the same way we say that God is loving. So God is a maximally great being. It has to be understood. Now, a maximally great being has to be all-knowing, all-powerful, and morally perfect in every possible world. If he is all-knowing, but he's not all-powerful, then he's not maximally great. If he's all-powerful, but he's not all-knowing, then he's not maximally great. If he's all-knowing and he's all-powerful, but he is not morally perfect, then he's not maximally great. So I'm sure you understand the all-knowing, all-powerful, and morally perfect, right? The last bit is where this argument actually rests upon. In every possible world. Now, a possible world is a description of a way reality could have been. That's what a possible world is. And a possible world involves past, present, and future. For example, the world we are in right now is the actual world, right? But there is a possible world in which unicorns would exist. You know unicorns, those mythical creatures. They exist in some novels. The world of those novels are possible worlds, right? You've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? Where you have Aslan, you have the kids, and you have everything that is happening, and you have a lion that is talking. You know, all of that. The world of Narnia is a possible world. The world of which movie? Troy, for example, is a possible world. The world in which the Avengers are superheroes, that's a possible world, right? So there is a possible world in which my name could have been Samuel. Did you get the point? There's no reason why my name could not have been Samuel. My name could easily have been Samuel. Your name could easily have been John Gorongo. Whatever. You get? So there's a possible world in which that is possible. There's a possible world in which ACs don't blow cold air, they blow hot air. So when we talk about possible worlds, we're talking about how reality could have been, basically. Right? So in this actual world, we're looking at from the beginning to the end. So when we speak of possible worlds now, we're not saying that where we are now, this is the possible world. Of course, this is the actual world, right? And of course, it's a possible world, it's the actual world, right? But we are saying that the actual world actually began in Eden and is going to end at the eschaton. That's if it ends. You get the point, right? So it began at the beginning when God created. It began at the beginning when God created. Okay, it did not begin in Eden. It began at the beginning when God created. Eden came after creation, right? So that's a mistake. It didn't begin in Eden. It began at the beginning when God created. And it's going to span till when we go to be with the Lord or when the end of time comes. That is the actual world. Right? But there's a possible world in which monkeys talk. Like, who does monkey banana? Okay, don't worry. Good. See, we're streaming this thing. Let's not be looking for trouble. There's a possible world in which monkeys talk. A possible world, yeah, the world of Tom and Jerry is a possible world. It's just the way the world could have been. That's basically what a possible world is. Now, we are saying that for a being to be maximally great, he has to have all of his properties in every possible world. If not, he's not maximally great. If he has all of his properties in one possible world, then he's not as great as a being that has all of his properties in 10 possible worlds. And that one is still not as great as a being that has all of his properties in 100 possible worlds. And that's not as great as a being that has his properties in every possible world. So, we are saying God is the the greatest conceivable being. Maximally great. It means that all of his attributes have to be his attributes in every possible world. Do you get it? It doesn't make sense. I should come again. Okay. You understand possible worlds, right? If you had a God that can be God in the actual world, but if the world was like Tom and Jerry, he will not be God. That is not a maximally great being. Because if the world of Tom and Jerry was the actual world, he will not be God. So the world of Tom and Jerry is a possible world, but it's not the actual world. We only have one actual world. This world is the actual world. Right? But we have other possible worlds. When you watch Prison Break, for example, that's a possible world.
So the question is, possible worlds, are they matters of our imaginations, what we can come up with as possibilities in ourselves?
Yes, as long as what you are imagining is not logically incoherent. Because there's no possible world where there's a married bachelor. Because a married bachelor is a logical inconsistency. Right? So you can imagine a world, like for example, I like the Lord of the Rings, right? The Lord of the Rings is a mythical world, right? It's like a story, right? But it's a possible world. It's a possible world. It's very possible that there is a ring that is to cause problem. At least we're Africans, we should know that now. It's very possible that there's a ring that causes problems, right? And you have to go to the place where it was forged to kill it so that everybody will be safe. It's a possible world. The world of Lord of the Rings is a possible world, but it's someone's imagination. The world of Tom and Jerry is a possible world, but it's someone's imagination. The world of Narnia is a possible world, but it's Lewis's imagination.
Yeah.
Do you get the point?
So basically, as long as we're able to think out possibilities that may not be in this actual world, but that anybody that can think about a possible thing that can exist, that's a possible world. That's a possible world.
So how many possible worlds are there? Infinite.
As much as men exist.
Right? There are infinite possible worlds. You can create 7 possible worlds now. I'm creating one world in which Uncle Dashni's car. That's a possible world. It's not the actual world, but it's a possible world. You get? I'm creating another possible world where Jos was the capital of Nigeria. This possible world. It's not actually, it's possible. I can create another possible world.
Where snow fell.
Yeah, where snow fell in Lagos. That's a possible world. Right? Or a world in which Margaret had wings and she could fly. That's a possible world. How many have we done now? Should we continue? We can create a possible world where at this time this meeting is not holding. That's a possible world. But what we are saying is that for a maximally great being to be maximally great, all of his attributes have to be his attributes in every possible world. So imagine this one possible world, and that possible world. There are 5 possible worlds, right? And in this possible world, which is the actual world, God is God. He's all powerful, he's all loving, and he's morally perfect. But if you create a possible world in your mind, he's not going to be God. He's not great enough. A maximally great being has to have all of his attributes in every possible world. Do you get it now? Does it make sense? Okay. This is the bone of this argument. In fact, I'll finish the argument. This is the argument, this possible worlds thing. And understanding how that a maximally great being must have all of his attributes in every possible world. If not, he's not maximally great. Now, you see this definition. No philosopher argues with this definition. Yes, no philosopher argues with this definition. This argument has like 5 premises, right? Or 6, depending on which. But I like the 5 premises model. 5 premises and 1 conclusion. There's only one premise that philosophers debate. The rest of them are not usually debated. Right? That's how deep this argument is. And how simple it is, but also difficult to explain to people that are not philosophical. Right? Okay. So you understand possible worlds, you understand the maximally great being and his attributes in every possible world. Alright, so let's go straight into the argument. Premise 1. Premise 1. It is possible that a maximally great being exists. It is possible that a maximally great being exists. That's premise 1. You see, because the way this argument is, if we want to condense the argument, what we will say is that if it is possible that God exists, then God must exist. That's the argument. If it is possible that God exists, then God must exist. You said? You won't take it. Don't worry, I'll give you the long version. You will take it when we finish. So, it is possible that a maximally great being exists. Premise 2. A maximally great being exists in some possible world. A maximally great being exists in some possible world, or in a possible world, right? A maximally great being exists in a possible world. Premise 3. If a maximally great being exists in a possible world, then a maximally great being exists in every possible world. If a maximally great being exists in a possible world, then the maximally great being exists in every possible world. Anyone you choose, it doesn't matter. A maximally great being, you see, you cannot have more than one maximally great being. By definition, God has to be one. Definitionally speaking. If God is a maximally great being, if God is the greatest conceivable being, you cannot have 2 greatest. Right? You can only have 1 greatest. So God cannot even be more than 1. So pluralism or pantheism doesn't even make sense. Strictly from a definitional standpoint. So whether I say a maximally great being or the maximally great being, it still doesn't mean anything, because definitionally speaking, that maximally great being can only be 1. Alright, that's premise 3, right? If a maximally great being exists in a possible world, that's premise 3. If a maximally great being exists in a possible world, then the maximally great being exists in every possible world. Possible world. If the maximally great being exists in a possible world, then the maximally great being exists in every possible world. I'm going to explain the premises, but I'm sure that by now you should even be able to follow it. Premise 4. If the maximally great being exists in every possible world, then the maximally great being exists in the actual world. It's coming stronger now, Abby. You are seeing it. I told you the simple argument. It's very easy. She? Margaret? It's easy. You have never laughed like this during any argument. It's either you really don't understand this or you really understand it.
It just really follows.
Just hit you.
It follows.
It follows, but it's a simple argument. If the maximally great being exists in every possible world, then the maximally great being exists in the actual world. That's premise 4. Premise 5. The maximally great being exists in the actual world. The maximally great being exists in the actual world. The maximally great being exists in the actual world. Conclusion. Therefore, a maximally great being exists. Therefore, a maximally great being exists. Is there any premise that you didn't get? So I'll go over it again. Is there any premise that you didn't get fully? So I'll go over it again. So premise 1, if it is possible that a maximally great being, premise 1, it is possible that a maximally great being exists, right? It is possible. Premise 2, a maximally great being exists in a possible world. Premise 3, if a maximally great being exists in a possible world, then the maximally great being exists in every possible world. Premise 4, if the maximally great being exists in every possible world, then the maximally great being exists in the actual world. Premise 5, a maximally great being exists. Conclusion. Therefore, a maximally great being exists. Simple. So, it's the first premise that is usually discussed. So, let's jump it and talk about the rest of them. Then we'll come back. A maximally great being exists in a possible world. No philosopher has any issues with this premise. Because, like we've said, you can invent a possible world. Right? So I can create a possible world where God exists. And if I create a possible world where God exists, in that world, God is a maximally great being. Right? If he exists in that possible world as a maximally great being, it means that he has to be omnipotent, omniscient, right? In every possible world. So from my imagination, I have created a possible world, and in that possible world there is a maximally great being, and in that possible world that maximally great being has to be maximally great, and for him to be maximally great he has to exist in every possible world. That's the second premise basically. So the third premise is that if premise 2 is true, then the maximally great being, right, must exist in every possible world. If no, it's not maximally great in your possible world. But if he is maximally great in your possible world, then he has to exist in every possible world. If he exists in every possible world, now this premise 4, if he exists in every possible world, then he has to exist in the actual world. Right? Yes, because the actual world is a possible world. This world is a possible world. So he has to exist in the actual world. I get so the power. He has to exist in the actual world. If he exists in the actual world, then he exists. That's straightforward. So the first issue is, it is possible, that's the first premise, it is possible that a maximally great being exists. So this is where the contention usually lies. And you see, with this argument, your burden of proof is not so much. We talk about burden of proof. I've probably not maybe gone into detail about it. There are certain arguments that make you to shoulder a high level of the burden of proof. There are certain arguments that don't. For example, with the atheist, the problem of evil presents, it's not an argument, but it's like a query against Christianity, right? So none of them has ever formulated it into an argument because it's not philosophically sound. Any argument you use from evil to show that God does not exist is false. It's not philosophically sound. So there is no argument. There's no argument, right? So it's like what we usually say. We have like 20-something arguments for God's existence. Atheists have 0. They don't even have 1. They don't even have 1 argument for God's existence. So what they do is they just try to counter our arguments and all of that. And we're very lovely people. We allow them. But at some point, they have to start shouldering the burden of proof. So with the problem of evil, please write it down. We have to do evil. What? How did I mistake it? That's one of the biggest queries against Christianity. Evil. So with the problem of evil, there are 2 versions of the queries against the problem of evil. There is the logical problem with evil. Then there is the probabilistic version. The logical problem, they basically say something like, if evil exists, then God cannot exist. That's the logical problem. Now, the argument that comes out from that statement is not philosophically airtight. It's not a sound argument. It's not valid. Okay, it's not sound. It's not a sound argument, right? But that's not all they have. They have a probabilistic argument against God from evil. And they say it's something like, if evil exists, it is very probable that God does not exist. Now, those 2 statements are different. The first statement is, if evil exists, God does not exist. That's a statement from knowledge. This is a statement from a probability that is very likely that God does not exist. So you see, the atheist that is defending the problem of evil usually has to defend one of these 2 horns of the problem of evil. Unfortunately, atheists are not even knowledgeable enough to know that there are different versions of the problem of evil. They don't even know, right? But if an atheist knew that there were different versions of the problem of evil, he will more likely stick with the second horn of the problem of evil, because the burden of proof, there is not so much. You just have to say probably. If you can show that probably God does not exist, you would have succeeded in convincing us based on that argument, right? But with the first horn, you are going to have to show us categorically, philosophically, and logically how God does not exist simply because evil exists. So you can see that with this argument, there are different levels of burdens of proof to shoulder, even though it's one argument, different arguments here, or different queries. That's the better way to say it. In the same way, for the Christian, we have some arguments that require a high level of the burden of proof. For example, the Kalam cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Simple argument, but it requires a high level of the burden of proof. Therefore, in the first premise, whatever begins to exist has a cause. We use philosophical reasons to address why that premise is true, right? We also use scientific reasons to address why that premise is true. When you come to the second, we use philosophical reasons. We also use scientific reasons. It's because the burden of proof we have to shoulder is very high if we are going to sustain the argument. I'm saying that for this argument, the burden of proof is not very high. It is, if it is possible. This is based on possibility. So this argument shifts the weight of the burden of proof to the atheist. The atheist will have to prove that it is impossible that God exists. Because if it is not impossible, then it is possible. And if it is possible, the remaining premises follow. Yeah, it's a trap. So you see, so it's a really powerful argument. It's just not really grasped by a lot of people because you have to start talking about possible worlds. What's a possible world? You know, that kind of thing. And many people don't have the kind of brain that can know what a possible world is. Okay. They don't use their brain enough to be able to know what a possible world is. But if I were with philosophers, not Nigerian philosophers, so I was in camp when we were serving. Then I met one guy, we got talking. Then the guy told me he studied philosophy. I was like, yay, let's do this thing. Then I asked the guy, do you know Alvin Plantinga? He says no. Okay. Do you know do you know Friedrich Nietzsche? He said no. Do you know Immanuel Kant? He said no. And I asked him that, what did you people do in your school? The philosophy that you did, what did you people do? So I now told him that I'm very interested in philosophy, especially religious philosophy. So I wanted to bring up, oh boy, the guy didn't know nothing. That guy did not know nothing. And I'm very sure that that's how his teachers are. Yes, now, your teachers in school, did they know what they were teaching you? They didn't know what they were teaching you now. Sure, we did philosophy and logic in this thing.
I don't know how I passed it.
Nobody knows how. Nobody knows how you passed it. Nobody. It's just something you do. Right? You just write the exam and trust God. If you pass, fine. If you don't pass, you write it again. But you won't read it. What we used to do is pass questions. Like 1 hour before the exam, you just take past questions, cram it, and go on. So I'm sure that that's how their teachers are. Because unfortunately, with the Nigerian system, our teachers don't know what they teach us. That's why they make it difficult.
Yeah.
The things that we think are hard, they are not really hard. Really. They're not. They're not really hard. But because they don't know, they cannot impart what they don't know. You can't impart knowledge if you don't know it. Right? And it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. You have people coming to class and they're telling you, they come to class and then they tell you in class that I'm not supposed to be a teacher, I'm meant to be a lecturer. It means you're supposed to find the blah blah blah. There's a way they used to say it. I'm not supposed to teach you, I'm supposed to lecture you, you're supposed to do research and all of that. But they don't teach you how to do research until you're in your final year. It's just crazy. So what are you supposed to be doing from 100 level? It's just, I beg, let's not enter that matter. So if you were with someone who knew a little about philosophy, this is the kind of argument you want to use, right? And then he has to prove that premise one is false. You don't have to prove anything. There's no burden of proof in this argument. He has to be the one to prove that it is impossible that a maximally great being exists. Because if it is even possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being must exist. Even if it's a 0.00, even if it's a 0.1 times 10 raised to the power minus 900 million chance, do you get? Once there is a chance that it is possible for a maximally great being to exist, then you have to follow through the rest of the argument, and you end up with the fact that a maximally great being exists. Right? So there's no burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the person. For you to prove that this argument is not sound, you are going to have to show us that it is impossible for a maximally great being to exist. This argument, do you know that Anselm brought it out? 1078. 1078. This is 2020, ba? That's like 1000. Yes. This is 2020 because we have 1078 now. So at least 1000 years ago. That's when this argument was. Nobody has been able to disprove it in 1,000 years. In 1,000 years. So there are some philosophers that have called it crap. Now people will talk. Okay, but show us that it's not true now. Nobody reach. Right? So it was one of those arguments that was revived by the wave of Christian philosophy, or the wave of Christian philosophers that came out in the 1950s, 1960s. So it would be funny to believe that before Alvin Plantinga, there were rarely any Christian philosophers. Every philosopher was atheist. All. Then Alvin Plantinga came. That man is a door opener. He opened the door. Now, most of the people that have defended Christianity intellectually have been philosophers. They've not even been theologians. They've been philosophers. Yeah, they've been philosophers. And Plantinga is... So I was telling you about one of his books, God, Freedom and Evil, something like that. And the argument he gives against evil has 20-something premises. Yeah, 20-something premises. And for each premise, he has to explain the premise with 2 paragraphs. So, yeah. So before those guys came, philosophy was largely dominated by atheists. And then in around the 1900s, Friedrich Nietzsche declared that God is dead. Yeah, there was that declaration, God is dead. So I'm sure you've seen the movie God's Not Dead. So there was that thing, God is dead. Times magazine at the time put it was their cover story, God is dead, God is dead. Then Plantinga came to show that the demise of God has been a lie. And that man revolutionized philosophy. He ensured that you can be a philosopher and be a Christian. Until he came, it was almost impossible. Right? In fact, a lot of the people who are atheists now, sensible atheists, are studying theology. I know one guy, it was I was telling, the guy that was debating Craig, he's 20 years old. He's studying theology at Oxford. He's atheist. He's studying theology so that he can show that Christianity is rubbish. He was debating Dr. Craig. And he asked Dr. Craig one question, but I thought they have caught that man. I thought that it's over. Like, the boy uses his brain. Hey! That boy started making YouTube videos when he was 17 about atheism. He does YouTube videos where he critiques his former view. You say, this is what I said before when I was an atheist to Bo. I want to show you that thing I said is wrong. Then he'll bring that thing he said, he'll dismantle it and still show you that there is a superior version of that thing he said, but he's still atheist. So he debated Dr. Craig. It was an online thing. It's a good debate. You should watch it. His name is Cosmic Skeptic.
That's his name.
That's his YouTube channel,
okay.
right? But then when he asked Dr. Craig that question, Baba is a boss. Hey, when he came out, I said, yeah, our father. That's the kind of question that they will ask you. You just give up. You're like, Kai, let me get back to you on that. Eventually, it's the boy that had to, So that's kind of. So when people stand in church and tell you things like philosophy has replaced the gospel, they don't know what they are talking about. Philosophy is actually why we are here. It's why we have a fighting chance. It's not theology, it's philosophy. Right? Anyway, so that's the ontological argument. Straightforward, right? If it is possible, that God exists, then it follows that God must exist. So I'm sure that if you follow the premises, you'll be able to regurgitate it. Alright, let me hear a question.
The second premise where you said maximally great thing exists in a possible world. And then you said that if you create a possible world and you create a maximally great thing in that possible world, that maximally great thing must be maximal in your world and in every possible world. If I create my own and I create a world here wherein your own maximally great thing does not actually, is not really the maximally great thing, or is not the maximally great thing in my world.
Yeah.
Then means my maximally great thing is now maximal die, or maximally great thing, and my maximally great thing is the maximal great thing.
True, I agree.
Okay.
And then if you have a maximally great being in your world, then he must exist in every possible. Unless you don't have a maximally great being, right? So, which is what the atheist has to prove, that it is impossible that God even exists. Do you get it? Because if it is possible that God exists, then God must exist in a possible world. That's what it means. If it is possible, then, if it is possible that Tom and Jerry exists, then Tom and Jerry must exist in a possible world. So Tom and Jerry actually does exist in a possible world, right? Not just in the actual world, but not in the actual world, but in a possible world, right? So if it is even possible that God exists, then God can exist in a possible world. And if he can exist in a possible world, and he's a maximally great being, he has to exist in every possible world, except the God you are talking about is not a maximally great being. And that's not the God we are talking about. The God we are talking about is a maximally great being. Right? So does that help? Okay.
Sorry, sir. I'm not sure I know how to ask this question. Only you're going to respond to it. But you said that, from the premises, a maximally great being, and you gave us the characteristics. You said he has to be
all-powerful, all-knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world.
In every possible world.
Yeah.
So features of this maximally great being.
Okay.
Since he has these qualities, he's all loving, and then he exists. And then he exists in an actual world.
Yeah.
And our actual world has some kind of evil. Yes. So don't you think that our world is going to be repugnant to him, or maybe if we're going to tie his existence to the fact that, okay, his existence is of a maximally great being, is
in every possible world, especially in this actual world. Yeah.
Yes, we're seeing things that are contradictory to qualities.
Okay, so I get what you're getting at, and this brings us to the problem of evil. But before we get to the problem of evil, let me explain, because there was something I said about a possible world, which you probably didn't get, but you're getting now. I said that our actual world now is not just the world the way it is. It is the way it has been from creation, and it's the way it will be in the eschaton. So if you look at our actual world now, there's a lot of evil. But there's going to come a time where there will be no evil in the actual world. Did you get it?
Yeah.
So, well, you just tell him, because that's what it is. You just tell him. Part of the hopes of Christianity, part of the reason why Christianity is because we know that this world is not the end. Right? Can we prove empirically that this world is not the end? No, we can't. You can't die and go and come back. Did you get? Or you say, let's kill the atheist so that he can check. That's the only way to prove that this world is not the end is to go there. That's the only way to prove it. We can't prove it empirically. Part of the reasons why we cannot prove it empirically is because it is not a physical reality. I remember when we were talking about 4 causes, Aristotle's 4 whys, we said that there is a formal cause, there is a material cause, right? There's what? There are 4 of them. There's a formal cause, there is a material cause, there is the one that is agency, right? Then, maybe help me check. I can't remember the 4th one. So those 4 whys. Did you write it? Did anybody write it at the time when we talked about it? There's a formal cause, there's a material cause. Alright, so just let me find it now. Yeah. Alright, so we said there's a material cause, there's a formal cause, there's a final cause, and then there's the efficient cause. So there's the material cause, there's the formal cause, there's the final cause, and then there's the efficient cause. The material cause speaks about matter, right? The formal cause speaks about the form, the way it is, right? The final cause speaks about the purpose, and the efficient cause speaks about the agent. So let me do it again with this example now. Look at this pulpit. If we ask, this pulpit exists, why does this pulpit exist? There are 4 answers we can give. Number 1, it exists because we need some place to keep our Bibles when we preach. That's the final cause. It's about purpose. Right? It's about purpose. Number 2, it exists because there was one man in Agunbiade that went to meet that makes pulpits. Right? So that's the efficient cause. That's the agent. Number 3, it exists because there's something called metal. You see, because if this pulpit was made of wood, it will not be this pulpit. It will be a wooden pulpit. In fact, if this pulpit was made of another kind of metal, it will not be this pulpit. If you were made of salt, you be a pillar of salt, you will not be a functioning human being. Do you get? So part of the reasons why this pulpit exists is because of the metal that it is made of. Do you get the point? Why does this pulpit exist? It exists because it has 4 legs, and it has this thing by the side, and then there are these glass panes. That's why this pulpit exists. Why does this pulpit exist? There are 4 answers to why this pulpit exists. Okay. Your car exists. Why does it exist? It exists because people need it to move from place to place. Right? That's the final cause. That's purpose. Right? It exists because Henry Ford decided that we could have automobile engines instead of horses. That's the efficient cause. That's the agent. It exists because there are metals and tires and all of that you can put together to form a car. If all we had was wood, we would not have cars. Right? We would not have cars if all we had was wood. Finally, it exists because there is a particular form that has been made. If we took all the materials that make the car and we made it into a pillar, it will not be a car. Do you get the point? Unfortunately, science can only answer 2 of these questions, of these 4 questions. Science can only answer material cause and formal cause. Science cannot speak to efficient cause. Science cannot speak to final cause. Science cannot say that this thing was made to bear Bibles. There's no scientific test you can do to ascertain the purpose of a thing. You can't. You may think that this is a laptop now, you bought it to do this thing. Then me, I carry the laptop and say, this is a good tray. Yes, because I'm a billionaire in Bitcoin. So this thing is not, so I can use it as a tray. So I just put it on. My own tray has a screen. Then when you come to visit me, I'll put chin-chin on it and a drink. And that's my tray. You cannot tell me that thing is not the scientific purpose of. There's no scientific way you can prove that I'm wrong. The only way you can prove that I'm wrong is with reference to purpose. The only way you can find out purpose is to ask the maker. Unfortunately, science does not have answers to purpose. Science does not have answers to the maker. Science only has answers to those 2. So, can we scientifically prove that there is a life after this life? No, we can't. It's because it lies outside of the domain of science. Right? And if someone wants to make you feel bad because you say you can't prove it scientifically, you are going to ask him, if the person is married, to prove that he loves his wife scientifically. What's the SI unit of love? You can't prove that you love your wife. You cannot even prove that you don't believe in God scientifically. It's not like we can test your brain. Then when we test your brain, we say, based on this MRI now, we can see that he doesn't believe in God. There's no scientific way to show. You get the point? It's because there are certain things that lie outside the domain of science. So there are physical realities and there are metaphysical realities. So realities like the afterlife is a metaphysical reality. It's not physical at all. Do you get the point? So, if we want to know whether there is a life after this life, because we cannot use science to investigate, we have to use something else to investigate. What can we use to investigate? For example, theology. We can use theology to investigate. What does theology say about this? Because science is not, the way they say it like science is the sole arbiter of truth. That everything that cannot be proven scientifically is false. Except that statement cannot be proven scientifically. Everything that cannot be proven scientifically is false. That statement itself, you can't prove that statement is true based on science. So it self-destructs. Right? So, theology is a tool, philosophy is a tool. So if we want to look at it philosophically, we'll ask ourselves certain questions. Number 1, do we have any pointers to the presence of an afterlife in this life? Of course we have pointers. 1, your desires. There are certain things that you desire that are not present in this actual world. Right? At least not in every degree. For example, Many people say that Adolf Hitler died without coming to justice. He kills 6 million Jews and then he offs himself. Kills himself and his wife, Abi his girlfriend. How is that supposed to be justice? If someone kills 6 million people, if you want to bring that person to justice, is killing him the best way? No, he's meant to live a long... we will ensure that anytime he wants to die, we'll call the best people in the world to keep him alive so that he can suffer. You get the point? But this guy offs himself. And if you shoot yourself, you're not even going to know that you're dead. You're not even going to know you're dead. If you hear a gunshot, it's because you're alive. It's because you're alive. That's why you heard the gunshot. You may still die. It's not. But if you heard that gunshot, it's because you're alive. If you died, you won't hear it. You just wake up and be looking at Thanos. You know?
When you desire an utopian state, a perfect state.
Yes. That doesn't exist in this world.
It's desire.
Yes, but it's a desire. Every craving you have, we talked about this the other day. Every craving you have, you only have that craving because you have experienced that thing. For instance, have you eaten kebab before? Kebab. I'm asking, have you eaten kebab before?
Meat on stick, right?
I don't know what it is, but have you eaten it before? Okay. Have you ever craved it?
I don't know it.
Exactly. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
You can't crave it because you don't know it. Do you understand? Okay. Have you eaten steak before? But have you ever craved it? Have you ever felt, sometimes your hormones, used to crave things. Abi? Have you ever craved stone cold ice cream? Abi, Cold Stone? You have craved it. Have you eaten Cold Stone ice cream before?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Have you eaten Cold Stone ice cream before? Ladies, they have eaten it. Let's ask, ladies I'm sure ladies have eaten Cold Stone. Aisha, you don't chop Cold Stone. That's problem. We have eaten Cold Stone. You have eaten Cold Stone. No, we have to do something about it. But have you ever craved Cold Stone before?
When I saw it.
Exactly. It was when you saw it. Your craving is a response to knowledge. It's a response to knowledge, right? It's a response to the availability of something. The moment you start craving something is because that thing is available. And again, this cannot be scientifically proven. But when you think about it, it makes sense. You can only crave something if the thing exists. So if you are craving justice, for example, oh God, let there be justice. It's because justice exists. Does justice exist in this world? No, not really. Even the psalmist was saying that he used to look at the wicked and he would see that they are flourishing and they are flourishing. And he said that was his thought until he entered into the sanctuary. And then God showed him their end. A lot of times, that end is not in this life. You can steal money and die and nothing will happen. And because God is not rushing. This is not the end. God has another one in that other world. You get the point? So can we scientifically prove that there is an afterlife? No, we can't. But we can give evidence that leads up to the fact that the most likely thing to conclude will be that there is an afterlife. And one of the ways to go about it is to draw from our desires, from our cravings, from the things we long for. We long for love, we long for peace, we long for a world in which there is no pain, a world in which there is no evil. It's because that world exists. And C.S. Lewis says, how does he say it? If I find in me a desire that does not exist, then it's a pointer to the fact that I was created for another world. Right? So you just say it to the atheist. That's how you say it to the atheist, basically. We cannot prove it in the lab, because not everything can be proven in the lab. Right? If not, he has to prove to us that he loves his wife. Show us. You say, I bought for her flower. Can't I buy for you flower if I don't love you? I don't cheat on her. It's one dog I have too. I don't cheat on my dog. It's one dog I have. If you see me on the street, I don't rub the heads of other dogs. I only rub the head of my dog. That doesn't mean I love my dog now. But, so you see, there is no way you can prove that you love somebody scientifically. You can only say it and the person can believe it. Or the person can choose to not believe it. Right? Because that's all you can do, really. You can show it, but everything you do that shows that you love is not proof of love. It's not proof. There is nothing you do because you love somebody that you cannot do despite not loving the person. Nothing. Okay, so do you get the way I'm thinking about it? So, about talking about evil now. So, because where you're coming from is about the fact that if God is all powerful and God is all loving, why is there evil? If God is present in this actual world, why is there evil in this actual world? Right? And I am saying that this the present state of affairs is not all of this actual world. This actual world actually has a part where there's no evil. There's a part of the actual world where there's no suffering. That's the part after Jesus comes again. There was a part of this actual world where there was no suffering, where there was no pain, where there was no evil. Right? That was the world before Adam fell. Right? At least there was no human suffering. In that world, there was no human suffering, there was no human pain, there was no evil present in that world, right? But something happened, and scripture says, as through one man sin entered into the world, right? And death passed upon all men because all sinned, right? So because of one man, sin enters into the world. So our actual world now takes a shape, right? If you have a problem with the existence of God in this actual world because there is evil, you are going to have to explain the presence of the fact that there was no evil at some point. Unless the person is saying God left. And if the person is saying God left, then it means that God exists, which is fine. Right? If it's okay if that's what you want to believe, it's fine. But you see, the point at which the difference between where there is no evil and where there is evil, that point is demarcated by a human decision. Right? It's demarcated by a human decision. It was because of the decision of a man that evil came into the world. And death came into the world. Human death, human suffering, and all of that. But that's not the end. That's the story of Christianity. That this world as it is not ideal. When you read Romans chapter 8, that's what you see. When it's talking about the manifestation of the creation, the earnest expectation of creation waits for the manifestation of the sons of God. Even creation is groaning because this world is not ideal. That's the story of Christianity. That is why Jesus comes to Lazarus. When Lazarus died, he comes to the sisters. And then when they say that if you are here, our brother will not have died, Jesus weeps. He was lamenting the brokenness of this world. It's a known fact in Christianity. It's part of the core things that our faith hangs upon, that the world as it is not the way it should be. So our actual world is not just now. Our actual world began before the fall. Our actual world will continue after Jesus comes. Right? So there is a part of the actual world in which there is evil, but there is a part of the actual world where God banishes all the evil. So, can you reconcile the presence of an all-loving, all-powerful God with a world where there is no evil because he banishes it? Of course. Right? So, looking at it from this point of view, from just this place, is not good enough. You're going to have to look through the whole stretch. Right? You're going to have to look through the whole stretch. Now, that's my preliminary answer. But the deeper answer will now be, why is there evil in this part of the actual world? If God is all powerful and if he is all loving. That's what we'll address in the problem of evil. Right? So maybe we'll start that next week. That's what we'll address in the problem of evil. You said? We can do evil next week and then we can push fine-tuning till. So do you get the point? Alright. Okay, so is there any other question? Any other question? Alright, no other question. So, this is Anselm's ontological argument. It's an argument that speaks of the being. And it's simple. If it is possible that God exists, then God must exist. And the way the argument goes is premise 1, it is possible that a maximally great being exists. Premise 2, maximally great being exists in some possible world. Premise 3, the maximally great, if premise 2 is true, then the maximally great being exists in every possible world. Premise 4, if premise 3 is true, then the maximally great being exists in the actual world. Premise 5, the maximally great being exists. Conclusion, a maximally great being exists. Right? And like we said, that the atheist is the person with the burden of proof. He has to show us, categorically speaking, that it is impossible for God to exist. And I don't think that that's a task that any philosopher can undertake successfully. You cannot show us that it's impossible for God to exist. Right? You can say it's not probable. But if you say it's not likely that God exists, it's okay. We can accept that. It still plays into our hands. Because the argument says, if it is possible. Right? And premise 1 says, it is possible. We're not saying it is likely. We're saying it is possible. And if it is likely, if it is possible, then it's okay. We win at the end of the day. So it's a solid argument that you probably want to look over again when you get home. Alright. No other questions, yeah? Okay. So someone should say a prayer for us. Let's close.